What's your name?
I'm Gary Horn.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in New York City.
What were you like as a kid?
I was a pretty happy, curious kid.
Did you play any sports growing up?
Sure did. Being from Manhattan, there aren't a lot of fields, no grass anywhere really, so as most Manhattan kids I played basketball a lot.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Columbia University in New York.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a writer.
How did you develop your interest in writing?
I developed my interest in writing mostly from reading, which is, I think, was for me, the best thing that I did as a kid and probably as an adult too, until I became a dad and a husband.
Mm-hmm. Were there any obstacles you faced becoming a writer?
There still are. It's really hard. The biggest obstacle to becoming a writer, oddly enough, isn't external. It's from inside oneself. It's pretty tough to get motivated to get up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to write something today. At least it is for me. Other people, I used to be very prolific. I used to write every day, and as I age, not so easy.
Was there anyone who helped you along the way to your goal of writing?
Oh, lots of people whose work I've read, and also I watch a lot of movies, and I find that the function of narrative, storytelling, for me is most immediate and accessible through film. Movies kind of float my boat these days more than books. I think it's because as I age, I'm developing more attention deficit issues, so that happens when you get old.
Was there ever a specific person who helped you along the way?
Sure. I would say the principal person that's helped me with everything is my son, who's now 20, and when he was a little boy, telling him stories day after day, almost hour after hour, was a huge boon to my, endeavoring to do this in a more serious way. And then we watched a lot of children's television together when he was little. And, oddly enough, Mr. Rogers has done so much for my development of my inherent value structure, and that's not something I ever took seriously until I was 38 when he was born and we began watching. So I'd say children's programming and children's books have helped me a lot.
What did you tell yourself when writing was hard for you?
Don't force anything, which leads to long, long breaks in time when I don't write. In fact, I'm in one now, so you caught me at a good period of time. I am not a good example of the Horatio Alger method of, if you don't want to do it anyway. I think most successful people adhere to that. I'm not in that group. I just kind of, I think the easy way to look at life is there are people who are doers and people who are beers. There's an old Frank Sinatra song called Strangers in the Night where he sings doobie doobie doo, and I think what he means is you're either a doer or a beer. I'm more of a beer than a doer.
Can you tell me about your screenwriting career?
Okay, well, for a long time I wrote what are referred to in the film business as spec scripts, which is I would have an idea and I would write a 110-page fictional script based upon my own imagination, and then give it to my agent, and my agent would then attempt to auction it. And lo and behold, one day after 7 years of doing this without very much success, I got a phone call from my agent who said, we have a contract offer from 20th Century Fox, and would you accept this amount of money? And I almost did a cartwheel in my wheelchair. I couldn't believe it. And I said, yeah, sure, and then at that point, from that point forth, things kind of came more easily. People were more interested in talking to me and reading what I had to write and stuff like that. So I guess if you stick to it, long enough, it can work for you. And if not, then you find something else cool to do. But it's okay not to be, successful. There's lots of stuff you can do.
Can you tell me about your first book, Swim in the Void?
Oh, well, that was before I ever wrote anything for the movies. I kept a diary, and in the diary, I wrote all these different poems and monologues and things. And I was in my early 20s at the time. And I had a friend who was an artist who's become a very successful oil painter, but in those days he was still in art school in New York, and he was just doing drawings with pen and ink. And he responded to each of my diary entries that I presented him with a drawing, something he was moved to draw based upon my, and we were very, very good friends. And we took that project to a publishing house back east, and they published it, and that became Swim in the Void, and we're all excited about it, and then basically nobody bought it, but it was fun to get it published. But the reality is you get really, really excited, and then 100 people buy the book, and you're sitting there with, I still have hundreds of books from the publishing house, so I'll give each of you one if you'd like, or 2 or 3, whatever you'd like.
Can you talk a little bit about being here now?
Well, the good news is that I can talk a good game. The not so good news is I don't really, walk my talk as well as I would like. I think it's great advice to keep one's attention to the present moment. My most difficult moments in my life, I don't know if this stretches to encompass anybody else's truth, but when I think about the past, which is gone and doesn't exist, or I think about the future, which hasn't arrived yet, I tend to be the least happy in those moments. And the happiest I am, and the most sort of unweighted and liberated I can feel, are generally those moments when I am comfortable with just thinking about what's going on in the present. And it's no great secret, I'm not delivering anything that isn't old news. I first was introduced to this idea by a friend of mine who I referenced in that article that was published in Huffington Post, who's a very wise man who wrote a book called Be Here Now in the early 1970s, which was at the time a revelation in publishing and still stands up as a really phenomenal work. And his name is Ram Dass, and he's a lot more eloquent than I am, but anything that was in that article was directly inspired from all that he had to say to me, and still does. He's 87 years old, and he's living in Maui and having fun and very much being here now.
Can you share the main idea of the article on regret?
Oh, regret. Well, I would say that after having a bad toothache or an earache, or maybe a migraine headache, regret is about the worst thing we can live with. I think anybody who's had regret would agree with that, and I think we all have it pretty much on a daily basis. Now, nobody is so special that they live without thoughts that are regretful, and we all have it. And to me, what moved me to write that article I haven't reread it in a long time, was just that feeling. If we could sort of, we're never going to dispense with the habit of experiencing regretful thoughts, but if we can find a way to look at those thoughts and just say, well, regret isn't doing me any good right now, it's not making me any happier, then maybe we can loosen the grip of the regretful thoughts. And I think that that's kind of the function of that article.
Can you tell me about the article You Never Know?
Yeah, you never know. For instance, and she asked me, she reminded me to relate it to the injury that rendered me neurologically compromised, which happened in 1981. And had I never had that injury, I would never have moved to California to pursue a physical therapy project that I was doing in 1987. And after that, maybe 7 years after my moving to California, various things kept me in California over those 7 years. I met a woman, and we ultimately had a baby, who's now my son, who's 20 years old. And, now I have another wife. I never would have met her had my first wife and I not separated. And all of these great things have happened based upon things that at the moment I wouldn't have chosen. I mean, nobody would say, okay, today I think I'm going to go get paralyzed. Let's do it. But it turned out great. So for me, for a lot of other people, I have a lot of other friends who went through, physical therapy and rehabilitation with me who have had really hard challenges in their lives. As it applies to me, turned out to be a good move. So I think, I'm lucky, but it's best for me to look at my life from that perspective. That I'm really very, very fortunate. And things kind of broke the right way for me.
What's it like to be a father?
Oh, it's great. I'm really lucky because I have my child he's like a blessing from above. He's an incredible person. He's just so good to the heart and always has been. He's just such a wondrous human being. So I feel lucky all the time. He's amazing. So I have to qualify that by saying I know what it's like to be Dylan's father, and that's an incredible experience. I think there are other people who have a harder time because maybe their children are more challenging, but it's I recommend it.
Can you remember the day he was born and like how that felt?
Oh, I remember every minute. Sure. Well, first of all, I have to say, and I can't really address any of these questions without saying I have a phenomenal stepdaughter too, who's Dylan's older sister, and he was early, so when it was ready to go to the hospital, there was this whole plan in place to get her to the neighbor's house. In fact, I was just speaking to the neighbor 10 minutes before you got here. She's still here next door. Except that this was 3:45 in the morning. And, we had to wake her up. And at the time she was 5 years old. And she was rubbing her eyes. And the first thing she said was, because Dylan was 2 weeks premature, she said, he's not going to be a June baby, he's going to be a May baby. So when you're living with somebody as wise as that, now you're doubly lucky, right? So, we went to St. John's in Santa Monica. We live in Malibu, and drove there. And then there was a lot of waiting around, you know, because he wasn't like going to be born immediately. So they had a sofa in the room, in the birthing room. So I kind of laid out on the sofa and took a nap. I like a nap. And then around noon, it was time to start. And you know, of course, I remember every second. And the amazing thing was that the doctor who we all agreed, you know, would deliver him, of course, was off that day. So we had to get a relief doctor to come in, which was fun. She was terrific, and yeah, I mean, he was terrific. And he came out, and then they gave him a little hat, right on his head, a little blue hat.
Can you share the main point of the article on contentment?
Yeah, I think most of the time, at least speaking of my experience, we live in a state of desiring things. And I love the work of the Buddha. And the Buddha said that if we can relax our attachment to desiring things, we're going to be much more peaceful and happy people. And when I really want something, and sometimes you really want something, you really gotta have it, and that is a formula for being unhappy, because not getting what you want can be tough. And I think even harder than that is getting what you want and finding out that it's not so great. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. The best thing is just to figure out a way to be content with what you got.
Could you talk about your accident?
Okay, I was at a place called Rockaway Beach, which is in Queens, New York. And I drove out there with a bunch of my friends from growing up on Memorial Day in 1981. And I jogged into the water, and the water appeared to be deeper to me than it actually was. And I dove in and I did a belly flop, and my chin hit a sandbar, and it broke my neck. And I was immediately unable to move anything. And then my friend, who I spoke to yesterday, I'm still close with these guys, one of my dearest friends, pulled me out of the water, and I was very scared. I couldn't move anything, and they, called the paramedics who came and put me in a paramedic van. And then my father was meeting us out that day because we were going to have a barbecue at my friend's parents' house, which was near the beach, their summer place in Rockaway, and my dad was coming out for that. And he happened to meet us there, and they flew me and my father in a helicopter from the beach to the hospital in Manhattan, where they treat acute spinal cord injuries. Because what happened was, when I broke my neck, the floating vertebra in my spine got pressed against my spinal cord, which made it impossible for the messages from my brain to my limbs to get through. And after that, they put me in a contraption called halo traction, where they drilled holes into these portions of my skull to keep my head from being able to move for 4 months. And I wasn't able to eat for a couple of weeks, and it was scary. But the interesting thing was that all of these people whom I loved suddenly were like around me all day and all night, because they were there, to support me. So it kind of turned into, from being very scary to being like, like having a wedding or a bar mitzvah that lasted 10 months. They were all around me all the time. So that aspect of it was, there was kind of a lightness to that, although I was, of course, 19 years old and having to embrace a completely new reality. So
Can you tell me how your injury changed the direction of your life?
Oh, it completely took the life that I had prior to that moment and made it completely obsolete. There was nothing about my life prior to that lasted, other than the one most important thing, which is still the most important thing in my life, which is love. You know, the love of all the people in my life and the love that I felt for them and that I felt from them. And that's the, you know, that's the one thing that's lasted, and that's the only important thing anyway. You know, anybody can have, you know, your body, no matter who you are, is going to be different next year than it was last year. You know, whether one sustains a spinal cord injury or a sprained ankle or, you know, a head cold. You know, things are constantly changing. In fact, science tells us that every cell in your body will be replaced within an arc of 7 years. Imagine that. There is not one bit of evidence in your body right now that is going to be there 7 years from now. Things will replicate in, you know, an exact way, you know, often, but you know, everything is changing in flux constantly. And so I just had the accelerated course when I got hurt. Things changed, you know.
How did being in a wheelchair change the way people treated you?
That's a terrific question. It's an interesting way to approach this question from a geographic standpoint, because I live in a place, as do you, in Los Angeles, which is a very privatized automobile culture. So I'm really not in public places that much that I don't choose to be in. So it's fairly, I don't like the word controlled, but it's fairly controlled. You know, I only go to places where I know I am going to be received in a courteous and welcoming way. You can choose that in LA. In New York, where I'm from, where I lived for 5 years in a wheelchair, very different, because being in a chair, you know, you hit the street and you're, you know, you're in the general populace all the time. People, and you know, I don't know if you've been to New York, but you've heard stories. Now, I thrive in New York. I love New York. My son goes to college there. He loves it. Our families, my wife's family's there. My family's all there. I love it. I love hitting the street. But it's different. People do treat you differently in a, you know, in a very different manner. For instance, in New York, particularly now with everybody walking in the street connected to their iPhone, people bang into me all the time. Never happens in LA. You know, I get a lot of, oh, I'm sorry, you know, kind of responses in New York. So that's what happens with strangers. What happens, you know, the lion's share of people who know me would tell you that the last thing that's wrong with me is my inability to walk. They would tell you that, you know, my personality stuff is far more oppressive than the fact that I don't walk. That said, it's a great question. When it came to dating, that was a very big difference, because there are 3 types of people you meet with dating when you're in a wheelchair. There are people who don't mind, doesn't make any difference to them, like my wife, right? There are people who won't go out with you because you're in a wheelchair. It's inconvenient for them, which I understand. And then there's the third group of people who are really dangerous, the people who prefer it. Right, these people who have like a very nurturing component to personality and they want somebody to take care of, those are the people you got to avoid. So I think that's the short answer.
Were you ever discriminated because you're in a wheelchair?
Of course. I don't know anybody who hasn't felt discriminated against. I think it boils down to this, and this might be tricky to grasp, so I'm plagiarizing. I didn't invent this idea. If you're going to relate to yourself in a given situation where there is pain for you, as a victim, you're never going to be happy. And there are a lot of people we're living in a time that is so challenging for women and so challenging for people of various sexual orientations and so challenging for people of certain racial orientations. I mean, and it's very hard not to feel like a victim. It's very, very tough because everybody has a right to. It's very tough. Now, I am a white man, which is, I guess, depending upon who you listen to, I got it good, right? It's easy to be a white man. You're the least discriminated against person in the current culture. I'm also a white man in a chair. So I live in both sides of that dichotomy. And the easiest answer I can give you is if you focus all on feeling victimized, you're not going to come to any kind of solution. And that's why I think things like Me Too and are fantastic, because people are acting rather than simply feeling bad. So I have people in my life who are people who live with disabilities who do great stuff about getting ramps built and elevators put in and bathrooms changed, and I really applaud those women and men who do that. I don't do nearly enough of that because I think I'm lazy. So time to get moving.
Tell me about your emotional recovery from the injury.
My emotional
recovery?
Recovery?
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I guess we all have an emotional body that gauges our own contentment or happiness or sadness, and I'm really very lucky because I have a lot of love in my life, and that I think for me is enough sustenance to be able to move on day to day. And in moments when I feel sad, I'm very lucky. I pick up a phone and I have my wife and I have my son and I have family, and I reach out and call them. And I'm also a great believer in finding some sort of practice like meditation, walking in nature, something that you can do, or that one can do, in intimate moments with one's self, just alone, that can help slow down the onslaught of emotions that we all experience. Now, you and your sister are teenage girls, and I look at that, and to me, every teenage girl out there is a hero or a heroine, because man, that's a lot to take on. There are a lot of feelings that you have during those years, and everybody wants to feel accepted and loved and approved of and part of the group. And my hat's off to all of you. And I know you're a Girl Scout program, and I think that they are probably doing great things to help you all out of that, with cultivating community, and that you can talk to people and talk to your friends and have some sort of safe space where you can, share how you're feeling. And the sharing is really a great petri dish for the love to grow. So in terms of emotional recovery, we're all recovering from something. Everybody has felt lousy at some point. Everybody has had loss. Everybody has had sadness. And some of it is so brutal to watch. But the fact that you look at somebody who's had what seems like more profound sadness than you doesn't always help you. And that's okay. I mean, if you're feeling crummy about something that happened in school today, on the one hand, you can say, well, look, at least I can go to school. And, Malala wasn't even allowed to go to school. And look how incredibly heroic and amazing she was. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that the thing that felt lousy to you today didn't happen. Because that happened and you felt bad. Somebody criticized your clothes or stole your boyfriend or you got a bad grade on the test. Those things feel bad. So my suggested antidote to that would be take a deep breath and maybe go out and sit by a tree and quiet your mind and remember all of those things about yourself that are lovable, because there are lots of things, I promise.
How many years have you been a Buddhist?
Oh, long. Well, I first took vows in 1985 or 1986. And then I've had various incarnations, with different schools of Buddhism. So I started out as a Tibetan Buddhist, and then I studied a different school of Tibetan Buddhism called the Gelugpa school. And then I took vows in Zen, which is Soto Zen, which is a Japanese school of Buddhism. And I worked with Maizumi Roshi, who's who passed away, who was here. He was the abbot of Zen Center of Los Angeles, and now I really I love a Tibetan practice called Tonglen, and another Tibetan practice called Dzogchen. So you can learn a lot about this stuff because the Buddha was enlightened in India, in Bodh Gaya, and different schools of Buddhism spread throughout Asia. And now it's really easy to study Buddhism in the West, in the United States, because there are many, many wonderful teachers all around and available to you if you want to pursue it. But the great thing about meditation is that it doesn't have to be affiliated with any religious tradition. And it's just so wonderful to just sit quietly. And you don't need to be a member of anything, you don't need to pay anybody anything, you don't need to own any special equipment. And I used to wear all these ornate beads, and I had a really long groovy beard, and I used to wear robes. You don't need any of that stuff. Just sit quietly. It's all you need to do.
How did you, what made you become a Buddhist or start it?
Oh, I think I read, a lot of literature. When I got injured, I was studying at Columbia University, and my dorm counselor, with whom I'm still friendly, he had begun taking Buddhist instruction in Chan Buddhism, which is a Chinese form of Zen Buddhism in Queens, New York, with a meditation master there, a Shifu there, named Sheng Yang, who was based in Taiwan. And I became interested in it through him. And then when I got injured, my dad brought me lots of books about the Buddha and the Buddha's life so that I could have them in the hospital. I was in the hospital for 10 months, and I spent a lot of time reading because there wasn't a lot of other stuff to do. So I read a lot. And that's, I guess, where it flowered for me.
Can you tell me what the role meditation has played in your life?
Well, that's a great question. I'm initially going to begin by saying that I am now 38 years into being a meditator. And I'm not terrific at it. 38 years. I mean, I don't know that I've done too much in my life other than that for 38 years. And I'm still, it's hard, basic meditation technique is you close your eyes, you get really comfortable, and you follow your breath in and out. And just notice the breath going in and out. And for me, I follow a little muscle in my stomach rising and falling. Now, how long do you think I can do that for where I'm really concentrated and noticing? Tell me, guess, how long do you think I can do that for?
A few minutes.
How about 5 seconds? And I've been doing this for 38 years. It's hard. There's a lot of thoughts whizzing around in there. And neuroscience, they've gotten very, very specific with measuring brain activity now in all these scientists at Stanford and the University of Wisconsin and Harvard and all these wonderful places. And they've gotten down to being able to measure that we have something like 32,000 thoughts per blink of an eye. It's a lot of thoughts to distract you from rising, falling, rising, right? So meditation is just an exercise for me of maybe slowing all that mental activity down just a smidgen. But even a smidgen really helps. Particularly now that we're bombarding ourselves, or at least I do anyway, with constant images. I mean, I have a really great cell phone. I have a smartphone, I have an Android, Samsung, unbelievable, right? This thing could power a rocket ship, practically. Except that the one thing that it does is it augments and multiplies all of these numerous thoughts in my head, and that takes my consciousness away from just slowing down and rising, falling, in, out. Do that a couple times a day for 5 minutes, and I guarantee you'll be more peaceful. And also, less time on your phone.